Hi everyone, can you hear me all right? Let me know if you can't hear me. I was hoping to have my camera working for this one. Got all dressed up with no place to go. So this is going to be a cameraless show. So I'm really excited about today's project. We're going to be animating a bouncy illustration, which is going to be super cute, and it's going to be done in Adobe After Effects. You guys can totally play along. I'm going to show you the Photoshop file, and I'm going to link you in the chat to the files that you're going to need for this. Alternatively, if you have something that you've already designed that's ready to go, you are welcome to use that as an alternative. Yeah, so my After Effects ended up on the wrong window. Let's bring it on over. Okay. I'm just going to load up my project so you can see what it is we're going to make. And a big thank you to Jamie Kreick for volunteering her illustration for this. I'm so excited to be animating her illustration. It's absolutely beautiful. So we've got a couple different levels of this project here, okay? So right here I have the finished version of, you know, what's an acceptable bouncy animation. And then we've got a more bouncier animation, which is here. And doesn't that look cute? So I didn't do that just completely out of my head. I'm not that good. It took some doing. It took a bunch of revisions and things like that, as these things usually do. But yeah, it was a process, and I'm excited to share that process with you guys. So give me just a moment while I load some things into our folder here, and then I'll share that with you in just a second, okay? Okay, so I have this Photoshop file that I set up, and it's got a whole bunch of layers to it, and we're going to explore that first, and then we're going to make this animation. Okay, so I'm just going to keep this guy playing while I load our files up. All right, everyone can hear me okay? Okay, good. And I have exciting news on the internet front. I am now hardwired directly into the matrix. So we should have no issues with getting everything like streaming properly and all that sort of jazz, okay? I hope you guys are excited as I am. This is going to be so cute. I'm also going to share with you guys my Flash file, also known as Adobe Animate. Now the problem with Adobe Animate and all the other programs that Adobe has done, these like little thumbnails, they're all the same color now, so it's like impossible for me to tell what icons correspond to which. So I did use Adobe Animate to kind of set up my my roughs, so I knew really how to make the flow go. Feel free to say hi in the chat and let me know who you are. Okay. And I'm just going to drag that guy in there and then share this file with you. Okay. Any questions before we begin? So yeah, you're gonna need to have your After Effects, your Photoshop, and if you don't have it installed yet, it would be helpful to have Adobe Media Encoder and possibly Adobe Animate if you want to open up the Animate part of things as well, because Adobe Animate is a pretty useful tool when it comes to rough animations. All right, so I'm dropping this into the chat. It's a bit.ly link. It should take you to our Google Drive, and it's just called Cactus folder. There's a Photoshop file in there, and there's also an Adobe Animate file in there. And I'm actually going to drop in one more thing, and that in case if you guys don't have Adobe Animate installed, I'm also going to give you the SWF file, and from Flash, Cactus Rough. Okay, so there's 3 things in that folder, and if you don't see all 3 things, just refresh the folder. There's Cactus Flat Anim Betterer, which is a PSD file. There is the Cactus Rough, which is a Flash file, and then there's Cactus Rough, which is a SWF file, which is basically like a vector movie. Okay, cool. So I'm just gonna jump right in with some Photoshop. And by the way, this tutorial is gonna take about an hour. The first half is going to be devoted to setting the whole thing up and all right, how do you organize your layers in After Effects and how do you do the basic animation? And then the second half, we're going to focus on making that animation really finessed, super bouncy, super fun, because animation takes time. And yes, the replay will be available at the exact same link, so not to worry about that. So here is my Photoshop. I'm not going to use the timeline. I'm just going to use this guy. So let me just open recent. That, okay. So this is the same file that I've put into Google Drive, and that Google Drive file again is in the chat. You can just download it from there. I have a folder called Eyes. Inside of the Eyes folder, I have a number of different layers. Now, Jamie's original illustration, in case if you didn't catch it, this illustration is courtesy of Jamie Kreick, and thank you so much, Jamie, for volunteering your illustration. So please don't use this in your own demo reels. That would just be gross. Just use this to practice with, and thank you to Jamie. So, all right, Eyes Open, she gave me one eye open in her original, and she had the right eye closed. Okay, so that was the joke, right? Like that the cactus base was kind of winking at us, right? But to do a really nice, smooth, effective camera blink, you really need to have more than just eyes open and closed. So I created pairs of eyes. So the eyes start to close here, then they're half closed, then they're quarter closed, then they're fully closed. Okay, now I'm not going to use all of them for both closed and open. Usually I have the eyes fully open to start off with, and then I have the eyes half, and then I have the eyes closed, and then I start opening them up like this, a little at a time, a little at a time, and finally fully open. Okay, all right, so that is my folder of eyes. Then I have all of these layers, okay, and I'm going to animate all these layers growing on, and that's going to be pretty cute. So just going to build it from the bottom. We've got our background texture, and if anyone has trouble downloading those files, just drop it into the chat, okay? So here's my background texture. Here's my background blob. I've got Cactus 1, which goes behind the pot because otherwise, like you have to have overlap. It's just necessary. Then I've got Cactus piece 4, 3, 2, and 5. So that's the order that I want them to pop in on. So Cactus 1 comes first, followed by Cactus 3. Okay, Cactus 1, then 3, then 2, and then 5 is the last guy. Okay, so, you know, if you want to, you could renumber those. And then the flowers come in kind of last, and the eyes. Okay? All right, so now that we are familiar with our Photoshop file, let's pop over to After Effects. And in After Effects, I'm going to close this project, and I'm going to start fresh. Okay, so if you have a project open, just do File, New Project. And I'm going to save my project because I don't want to screw things up, and autosave isn't going to kick in unless I save in the first place. So here is my folder. I'm going to save right into here, and I'm going to call it Cactus Live. And after this YouTube live stream, I will plop my Cactus Live into that same folder so you can see the finished version as well. Okay, so here is Cactus Live. Fabulous. And the very first thing I'm going to do, friends, is I'm going to create a new empty composition. Okay, now people often ask me, like, what's the default setting for After Effects compositions? And it really depends on where you're delivering. So if you're delivering your files to like Instagram, there are certain settings that are good for Instagram. If you're delivering it to YouTube, certain settings are good for YouTube. If you're doing an out of home or like a video billboard, a bus shelter video, sometimes you can even get videos that are on the sides of buses. All of these come with their own delivery specs, and that affects your frames per second and your duration sometimes, and your dimensions. So how big the thing is, how many frames per second it's running at, as well as the duration sometimes. Sometimes they'll specify like, oh, it can only be 2 minutes long, or it needs to be 15 seconds on the nose, and that kind of thing. Okay? All right, so I'm just gonna try and get my camera back on again. And is it talking to my computer? No, so forget it. Okay, so anyways, I'm gonna make a new empty composition, and this way the next thing I import is gonna come in with the right settings, okay? Because it's just really sort of a drag to have to extend all of your layers if your composition duration is too short. So here in my composition settings, I'm going to set up not the dimensions, that doesn't matter, but the frame rate is super important. So I'm gonna set the frame rate to either 24 or 30 for Instagram. Then down at the bottom for duration, I'm gonna set that just to be on the safe side, like 300, which I know is like way longer than I'm gonna need, but I think that's okay, all right? And then I'm gonna hit okay. And my After Effects always shows me the last thing I worked on. I don't know about yours. And here we go. So anyways, once I've created that empty composition, I call that my dummy comp, I delete it because its work is done. Okay, so I can just select it and hit the delete key on my keyboard, bye-bye. And now it's time to import my layered Photoshop file. Oh, so exciting. So I'm gonna go File menu, Import, File, and I'm gonna navigate over to my Cactus Anim Betterer PSD file. Now we got to import this a special way, okay? So don't just like click it and hit import. Not a good idea. If you've already done that, undo, go back, import again. Import as, you want to set this to composition, retain layer sizes. Now this is what I use whenever it's final artwork. I'm not going to go back into Photoshop and do any fussing. It is done. It is final art, and this is the easiest way to animate. So composition, retain layer sizes. And I'm not going to turn on any checkboxes. Those are not my friend. Basically, if you are one of those people like me who likes doing multiple versions of your videos or of your Photoshop files, if you choose Photoshop sequence, it's going to bring it in as like the world's shortest movie, like depending on how many frames you've got, how many frames or versions you've got. And create composition, dude, we're already bringing it in as a composition. So you don't want like an envelope in an envelope, or as my buddy Jill would say, a bag in a bag. So here we go, composition, retain layer sizes, and I hit import. And then this is what I call the are you sure window. It's sort of like, are you sure you did the right thing? So composition, retain layer sizes, merging layer styles into footage, and I hit okay. And then what I do is I double click this little film strip guy. Don't drag and drop because once again, it's gonna put a bag in a bag. You don't wanna do that. So I double click that composition, and there we go. There's all my layers. And notice what happened to my eyes group. So if I double click that eyes group, I can see that I have all of my eye layers ready to go, okay? And I'm gonna animate this a couple of different ways. And I think it would be a good idea for me to have a little bit of flexibility in doing that, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to animate it one way and then animate it another way. And I think probably the best way to do it would be to have this duplicated, okay? Now, the eye blink and wink are probably gonna have slightly different timing. And the problem with duplicating a composition just like that is that it's going to still reference this same eyes pre-comp in both of the compositions. So that's not great. You don't really want to do that. So I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to duplicate it, edit duplicate. Okay, and now I've got the regular one and I've got number 2. And I'm going to locate this composition that says eyes by right-clicking it and choosing reveal layer source in project. There it is. And I'm going to duplicate that as well. Edit, duplicate. Okay, so now I have eyes and eyes 2. And if I double click the composition number 2, I can swap in this eyes 2 right in here, option drag. Okay, cool. So now I have eyes 1 and eyes 2, and each of my little compositions is going to be referencing a different one. Okay, so here is the first comp, and I'm going to animate it pretty simply, and I'm going to set up all of my anchor points, and we're going to be like ready to go. And I'm going to hit T for opacity and change the opacity value of all of these guys to 50. Now the advantage of doing that is then you can see where your areas of overlap are, and that's going to make it much easier to animate in the end. So I'm going to scroll all the way down and I'm going to set my anchor points one at a time, or I'm going to lock my layers. So my background, I'm going to change that to 100% and I'm going to lock it. My background blob, it doesn't really need an anchor point. Well, maybe I'll just shift it slightly. Okay, background blob. But we'll deal with that guy in a minute. I'm just gonna pretend that it's good for now. The cactus. Now it might be a little hard for you to see your layer handles because the background is white, so you can just temporarily turn off that background layer. And with the anchor point tool, you can set the anchor point to the point from which you want each of your layers to rotate, scale, and reposition from. So I'm going to zoom in, I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to move its anchor to the bottom. I'm going to take this guy, move its anchor to its base. This guy gets its anchor over here, and I'm just like clicking on each of the little layers and moving their anchor points to their base. Okay, here we go. There we go. And then each of these little flowers, this is one thing I really like about the anchor point tool, is that you can actually like hover and it gives you these like corners, photo corners I call them, and then you can set your anchor points. And that one moved someplace crazy. Okay, let's try this guy, he's fine. And I always double check because my anchor points sometimes have a mind of their own. I want this one to be right at the bottom. Now if you ever want an anchor point to snap, just hold the Command or Control key. So Command on Mac, Control on PC. And for the flower pot, I'm actually going to have its anchor point be all the way at the bottom left corner there. Okay? All right, cool. So I'm going to next change everybody's opacity back to 100%. T for opacity, and just dragging that value up again. All right. Cool, so those are all ready. I'm gonna color code now. And if you're following along and you want me to pause, just pop that into the chat and I can pause, no problem. But I'm gonna color code. So to color code, you kind of need to select your layers out of order. So hold the Command key on a Mac, Control key on PC to select out of order. And all the cactus parts, I'm going to make those green. And my flowers, I'm going to make those fuchsia, my favorite label color. And then we're going to start to set this up in terms of relationship between our layers, okay? So by relationship, I mean, these are kind of codependent layers. So I think it's going to be important to respect that and connect them appropriately. So see my anchor point shifted on that guy? That's not good. Yeah, you guys are fine. You're fine. Yeah, better. Now I'm finding that the green on green is a little tough to see, so I'm just gonna change that once again. Maybe I'll change that to like brown. Yeah, that's easier. So my flowers are gonna be parented to this cactus piece. And if you don't see the parent and link column showing, just right click where it says parent and link and go to columns and choose parent and link. And I got to columns just by right clicking where it says layer name or source name, going to columns and choosing parent and link. Okay, now if you're working in timecode and you want mine to look like yours, you should command click on a Mac or control click on a PC to get this to change, okay? And then you might want to revisit those composition settings once more and just be like, hey, the duration should be 300 frames, okay? So command or control click to switch it over. All right, so these flowers, I'm going to parent and link them to Cactus 5. Cactus 5 and Cactus 4 are both going to be connected to Cactus 3. Okay, so I just take this little pick whip and I drag it over to this dude. Okay, and then Cactus 3 and Cactus 2 are going to be parented to Cactus 1. So it's kind of like this inverse relationship where like the fingertips are connected to the finger knuckles, are connected to the palm, is connected to the wrist, you know, kind of going backwards that way. The Cactus 1 is going to be parented to the pot, okay? And then I'm going to do something special to my background blob here because my background blob can't really animate the way that it is, and it is a Photoshop file, so I'm sort of stuck in that sense. And just making sure that my background is also set to 100% opacity and just locking that guy, okay? All right, so we've got our background blob, and there's this really cool thing in After Effects called Auto Trace, similar to what they have in Illustrator. Now, if you choose Auto Trace, you can choose to trace the current frame, and these are the settings that I really liked, okay? So I set no blur, channel to alpha. It's just gonna trace the opaque areas of my background blob layer, tolerance of 10, threshold 40, minimum area of 10 pixels, and a corner roundness of 50%, okay? And you can choose preview, and it kind of shows you what it's planning. And then you can increase or decrease your different numbers to see whether that makes it better or worse. So a lower tolerance means that it's going to be a little wobblier, and that's actually a good thing because we want it to be as faithful to the illustration as possible. So I actually changed my tolerance to 5, and then I hit OK. Now what that does is it creates a solid layer, and the solid layer is just by default white. So if we want that to have the same color as our background blob, just turn off the visibility of the auto traced blob, and we're just going to select, well, we're going to change the color by going to Layer, Solid Settings, and take that eyedropper, just click on that pink, okay? And then I can drag that down, turn on its visibility, and hide my original background blob. Maybe I'll even lock it so I don't move it. Okay, so this is what we want to end up with. This is where we want to end up with stuff. And I'm just gonna do like really basic timing first. So my basic timing is gonna be that first, like the background is just present. Then our background blob comes up, and then our cactus like our flower pot falls, and then the cactus kind of builds on, okay? So blob, pot fall, cactus build. Those are our 3 major beats, and then wink. So 4 beats. So I'm going to move this so that it starts, like the blob is gonna start pretty soon after this begins, switching over to the selection tool. And you can drag inside the layer content bar and hold the shift key, and it's just gonna snap, okay? So there's where my blob is gonna start. And then maybe around like frame 10, or maybe frame frame 12, about half a second, since we're at 24 frames per second here. I'm going to just change the like impact point for the pot. Okay, so at 12 frames, I'm going to take my pot and I'm going to set the position keyframe for it. Okay, and so that's where it's like kind of going to hit. And earlier in the timeline, I'm going to have it come in from the top. Okay, so that pot, we have its position keyframe. And then all of the cactus pieces, I'm going to have them come on like maybe around frame 18 or so, because I'm going to have the pot like kind of fall on one corner and then rock. So all my cactus pieces come on then, and my flower like this, and then maybe a little bit later I'm going to have the blink, or the wink rather. Okay, so right here, just going to go into eyes, and this is the simple version, remember. So I could just set the layer content bars to end right there. I find it a little bit more animation friendly to just do it slightly differently. Okay, so let's just take a look at this. So right here, I'm going to mark with the the wink right here in the eyes composition. And here's a cool trick that I learned from Gozia actually, is that when nothing is selected, you can hit the asterisk on your number pad, or you can do Shift 8 on your number line, and that creates a marker. And then when you go back to your original composition, you can go to layer menu, you can go to markers, and you can do update markers from source, and look, that marker also shows up, which is pretty great. So I'm next going to just have that blink happen, or the wink happen, and that's on this eye right here. Okay, so I'm going to hit T for opacity, turn on the stopwatch, and I'm going to change this keyframe type to a hold keyframe. So I go to the animation menu, toggle hold, and that changes it to a hold keyframe. And a hold keyframe, remember, keeps its value until it meets a new keyframe with a new value. So right here, at this point in time, I'm going to change my opacity to 0, and then I'm going to take my eye close right, and I'm going to have it turn on. Okay, now I'm going to do the same kind of thing for the eye close right. I'm going to hit T for opacity, turn on the stopwatch, animation, toggle hold, but at the beginning of the timeline, that eye is going to be at 0%. And at the point where it blinks, it's going to be at 100. Okay, so here's what it's going to look like. Nothing, nothing, wink. And then about 6 frames later, which I can get to just by clicking in here, doing a little +6, I can change the eye closed back to 0 and the eye open back to 100. Okay, so let's take a look at this very rudimentary animation so far. Okay, I forgot to shorten up this piece. Okay, so here we go. All right, and we probably want the flowers to come in very, very last, but we'll deal with that in a second. I want the flowers to maybe come in right around 24 frames. All right, so let's animate this guy falling, shall we? So here's my pot, and I'm gonna animate it falling down. So at the beginning of the timeline, I'm just gonna pull it up. The eyes are not attached. That's so sad. Let me go back and parent the eyes. So the eyes should also be parented to the pot. Okay, and we'll have the eyes actually, we'll have them fade on at some point, but right here, P for position, and at 12 frames, it's down in position, and I have the stopwatch enabled there. And then earlier in time, I'm just gonna move this all the way up. Okay, there it is up in the sky. Fabulous. Okay, so just playing that back. And to make it feel like it's being dropped, I'm going to hit F9, and that's going to give it an ease. All right, so that fell down. And I'm going to also make it kind of look like it's rocking. So like 1 frame before it hits the ground, I'm going to set a rotation keyframe. So I hold the Shift key and type R, and I get rotation. And then like a couple frames after the position hit, I'm just going to take that rotation tool and just rotate that back a little bit, just like so. Okay, and next I'm gonna go about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames forward, and it's gonna go down to 0. And I want it to rock back again. So maybe I want all these guys to be a little later. So I'm just gonna move all those so they actually start at like around 24. And this sort of retiming happens like all the time. So let's just take a look. Okay, that's not too bad. I'm just gonna have this ease right here, so a little F9 action. Alternatively, you can right click your keyframe, go to keyframe assistant, choose easy ease. Okay. All right, so I select this guy and I hit F9. And so now it's going to kind of hang out in that rotated state before it plops down. Okay. And then I want all these guys to just sort of pop onto the scene. And they're going to pop on using various means. So my eyes, I'm actually going to fade them on. So I'm going to set the opacity to 0, and then I'm going to advance a little bit, and not very long. It's going to be maybe a 5 frame fade on. So there we go. So here's what we got so far. Okay, and maybe a 4 frame fade on. And then all these guys, I'm going to animate their scale and their rotation. Okay, not all of them, but most of them. So let's take a look. I'm going to first do scale because they all get the same scale. So S for scale, and the cool thing about scale is it's based on 0 to 100, so you really don't have to like work very hard at the math. You don't have to memorize any numbers. You don't need to set keyframes in a reverse order. You can just say, you know what, turn on that stopwatch, change the scale to 0, and then about 6 frames later, so plus 6, I'm going to change the scale, not to 100, but I'm going to do a little overshoot. And let me just select all those keyframe guys here. Okay, not the eyes, just the flowers and the cactus, right? So at frame 26, I'm just going to set the scale to 110. And about 3 frames later, I'm going to set the scale to 100. Okay, and this middle column, I'm just going to draw a tall, skinny box. Okay, and I'm going to hit F9, and that is going to give me an ease. Okay, so always playing it back. I'm going to hide my guides here so we can see that. And that's like kind of blah, right? Like everything's happening all at the same time. So we're going to stagger our keyframes. That's my big shtick, friends. I love animating things together and then staggering them in time so that they feel like they're kind of happening in sequence. So I'm going to take all these guys and just start moving them. And I just selected cactus 4 all the way up to flower 2. And I'm going to drag inside the layer content bar like just a couple of clicks. So like maybe 2 frames forward or 3 frames forward. Yeah, I think 2 frames is probably good. And then command or control click to deselect the bottommost guy, which I think is, which one is that? Oh, that was not the right one. So that one's going to be later. But I want these 2 to be a little bit delayed. So just selecting these 2 and setting them a little bit later, and then taking this guy a little later. You know, so they're like, these 2 are 2 frames apart from cactus 1. Okay, so cactus 1 grows, and then his friends, cactus 3 and 2 grow on. And then after that, cactus 4 comes on, which is like the friend of this guy. And then finally, cactus 5. And after that, we have our flowers. Okay, and the flowers, I'm going to have them grow on one at a time as well. Okay, so I probably want to delay that wink a bunch, just so that it's more of a punchline. And I'm going to take these keyframes for the fade and just move them a little bit earlier. Okay, let's take a look at how this is. Now, if you want to view your composition viewer bigger, hover your mouse in here. And if you look at your keyboard, directly below the escape key is a squiggle, also known as the tilde. I'm going to hit the space bar. And that's pretty cute. The last thing I'm probably going to do is just add a little bit of scale and wiggle to this guy. So I'm just going to move this out like so. Oh, how do you get the keyframes to move together with the layer content bar? You just hover your mouse inside the layer content bar and you just drag inside. And that's going to take all the keyframes together. Or if you wanted, like what I did a lot of times was I selected all of those. I'm just answering Toby's question here from the chat. I selected all the layers and I dragged inside like this. Okay, and this way the beginning of the layer as well as all of the keyframes kind of move together. Okay, okay. And then at the very end, I'm just going to stick a little fade of the background one more time. So I take my background, I duplicate, I'm going to drag it all the way up, and I'm going to give it a bit of a fade. Okay, cool. I'm glad you got it, Toby. Thank you. Thanks for sticking around. So right here, I'm going to do an opacity fade so that the background starts at 0 and ends at 100%. This is going to give us a nice loop. And I need to tilde so that I can see this whole thing full screen. And that's not terrible, right? It's kind of cute. It gets the job done. You know, everything's kind of moving, but it's not really as alive as it could be, okay? In the next version, I'm gonna really kick this up quite a bit, okay? So like, for example, with the blob, there are all these beautiful Bezier points that I can mess with. I haven't animated the scale of it at all, and it could, matter of fact, kind of jiggle a little bit. Okay, so just to give you an idea of what it could do, I'm just going to do a little bit of scale animation on it. 0, and then 6 frames later, I'm going to bring it to 110, and at 3 frames after that, I'm going to go back to 100. This keyframe gets an ease, and I want this shape to happen right there at 12 frames, okay? So at 12 frames, I'm gonna hit letter M for mask, and I'm gonna make sure that my mask keyframe is right there. And then I hit letter U, and I can see my other keyframes. And right here, I'm just gonna take these points and like kind of bulge them out a bunch, you know? Like bulgy, bulgy, bulge. Oh crap, I got to the edge of the solid. That is not good. So that's one of the shortcomings of the auto trace feature in After Effects, is that it kind of cuts you off a little bit. So just be mindful of that. Make sure that you're not pushing the envelope beyond what the solid is allowing you to. Okay, and then right here, I'm actually going to copy paste the final keyframe and now ease this little guy, or the bigger guy. Okay, so it does that, but it's still like really stiff, right? So I have a trick for you. In the effects and presets, I'm just going to type in wiggle, and there is a behavior called wiggle gelatin that I discovered, and it actually works pretty good. So I'm going to double click that to add it to my layer. And it's a little crazy. Let me play it back for you. Like, really, do we need so much wiggle? So I'm going to reduce the wiggle amount and the wiggle speed. So the number of wiggles per second, I'm going to set that to like 0.2. And the wiggle amount, I'm going to set to like 4. And let's just play that back. Okay, that's like way too much. Let's do wiggle amount of 1. And that's not terrible. So I'm just gonna have this wiggle amount at like 1 or maybe 2, and then like right before all the real action hits, I'm going to change the wiggle amount to 0. So it's going to gradually get less wiggly. And now look at it. It's all together now. Yeah, and even the 2 feels a bit much. So if I just hit letter U, I can see those keyframes again. I'm just going to set that wiggle amount to like 1.5, and I think that'll be fine. Okay. All right, so how are we doing? Are we pretty happy with this? Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cute. You can do this type of thing. But what if you wanted to like really kick it up a notch? Well, enter Adobe Animate. So this is part 2. I might go a couple minutes over. I hope you don't mind. So here is Adobe Animate. And what I did in Adobe Animate was I imported the still image of the final version, okay? And that's down here. It's called Orig Drawing. And I just traced it, okay? And that was my final position. And then I was a traditionally trained animator once upon a time, and you got to think in terms of like squash and stretch, and also angles and things like that. So the vase or the flower pot falls first, and it's pretty much keeping its volume until it squashes down here. See how I put this rectangle around it so that you can really see how the volume is still the same basically, but it's squashed down. Then it starts to grow and it's up in the air. And this is what the overall thing looks like. And if I turn off the original drawing, you'll be able to see that better. And that's like kind of better, right? Like it's got a lot more personality to it. So I just went through and I did a little bit of squash and stretch stuff. And I exported this. I took all of my rough layers and I set them to guide beforehand. This way those layers don't export. Even if the visibility is turned off in Flash, or in Adobe Animate, it'll still export. And then I went to File, Export, Movie, and that actually exported an SWF file. Now, an SWF file, if you're not familiar, is a vector movie, okay? And a vector movie basically just means that it's it can be infinitely scaled. Like, whoa, really? A movie can do that? Yes. So what I did for the other version was I actually imported that SWF file into After Effects, and then I modified the animation so that it had the same sort of feeling as that, okay? So yeah, let's do that. And in the interest of time, I'm actually going to use this as a basis for our next exercise. So I'm just going to take all of these layers and edit, select all, copy, and come over here, select all, delete, and paste, just so that I have like the basis of everything. And then for my eyes, that timing is definitely going to change. So I can right click, reveal layer source in project, and I'm just going to swap the eyes for eyes 2. Okay, option drag will do that for me. Fabulous. Okay, so I hope that made sense. I just didn't want to have to reanimate everything because we are getting close to the 1 hour mark. Okay, so how did I get this SWF in here, and what gives with that whole workflow? Well, let me show you. So let me save my project. Save early, save often, very important. And I'm going to import that SWF file. And you can do that too. If you go to that bit.ly link that's in the chat, you can download those files and you can definitely import that SWF file also. So I have mine in a folder called From Flash, and here it is, Cactus Rough 3, and I'm going to import it. And then I'm going to put it right into my timeline. There we go. All right, and what I'm going to do on this, just so that I can can kind of more easily keep track of everything is I'm going to mark up my layer. So on this frame, I'm going to go to Layer, Markers, Add Marker, and I can do that with asterisk or Shift 8, okay? So I'm just going to advance frame by frame, Command right arrow to go forward, and then here's another one. And every time I get to a new pose, I'm just setting another keyframe. Sorry, not keyframe, another marker. There we go. So here's another one, and I'm just making that. And then here. And these are rough, right? So it didn't need to be perfect. And matter of fact, it's better to go rough when it comes to these types of guide animations, just so that you have more time to spend on the After Effects part, right? And I numbered mine in the corner. See how there's numbers like written in monkey scroll, just so that I could keep track of what my different positions were. Okay, and then the wink happened here. Okay, so then it opened up again right there. And the wink is subject to change because that's a little bit more complex this time. Okay, so let's get started with getting this all posed out. So first of all, the fall. So this guy falls a lot faster than our pot that we already animated. So I'm going to take all these keyframes and I'm going to move them earlier, right? So it's going to all fall down in about 6 frames. And again, because this is rough, I'm not like putting a lot of stock into making it perfectly match my rough, if you get my drift. And I'm just going to take this, I'm going to rotate it with the rotation tool. Notice I moved my rotation keyframe. I'm going to take my selection tool and just squash it. Okay, and a good rule of thumb, if you're trying to maintain the volume of your things, which I hope you are, is to make sure that these two numbers add up to 200. Okay, so I didn't do that in my previous keyframe. Should definitely be at 100% across the board. So if your numbers are changing together and you don't want them to, uncheck the chain link and then go next door, and now you've got 100%, 100%. Let me just zoom in here, okay? So it's falling and then it squashes. And if I wanted this to be like perfectly perfect, it would be 135 by 65, and that would maintain the volume, okay? And one thing that you might like to try out is the Bezier warp effect. That's what I used in the original version that was super squashy and stretchy. It's not totally necessary, but it does add a little bit of extra oomph to squash and stretch, especially with things like this flower pot that don't have a lot of pieces to them. So like 1 frame before the hit, I would turn on all these stopwatches, and then on the hit, I would just take these handles and kind of squash them out, okay? So it's like more squashier, you know, and you could like kind of squash it down like this, so that it really feels like it's got weight on that side. And you don't want to squash too much, but you know, something like this would be good. All right, so there, and then I'm going to go to the next pose, which is here. Okay, and here we need to rotate up. We need to move this, okay? We need to stretch it, right? And we need to Bezier warp that bad boy. So I'm going to take my handles and just kind of do this kind of movement to them, okay? And this part is really important. So hover your mouse in the timeline. Hit the tilde or squiggle key that's under your escape key. Hit the letter U on your keyboard, okay? Now, what you'll notice is that some things are keyframed and some things are not. And so that bad things don't happen in your animation, it's a good idea for everything on Bezier Warp to always be keyframed. Call me crazy, but I like doing it that way because otherwise you end up with unexpected effects. So I'm just copying and pasting into any empty areas in this keyframe, like I copied from the first keyframes over here. But then for the last keyframes, I'm just gonna click and drag on these little buttons on the side. These little buttons are gonna add or remove keyframes at the current time. Okay, so now we've got that. So squash, stretch happening here, and then our next keyframe is here. And I'm gonna move my whole layer up. Actually, I'm going to move it up over here on this frame 18. So using my shift and arrow keys to move it into place right there. And I'm going to rotate it with the rotation tool and maybe scale it up a little bit more like this, a little bit more stretch, and click on the effect in order to get those handles, okay? And I love this curve that's happening in my terrible rough animation. And then just gonna go back to tilde on the timeline. And your mouse just needs to be hovered in the timeline in order for tilde to go full screen with it. I'm gonna get rid of this stray rotation keyframe, which was supposed to be for 0. And then I'm gonna have this squash back down, okay? So I'm gonna go back to like this position, meep. I'm gonna copy it, Control C or Command C, and then I'm gonna go to this keyframe right here on my rough, and I'm gonna paste that guy on my flower pot. Okay, and if you want everything to kind of go back to normal with your Bezier Warp, here's a fun trick. Just click reset. Goes back to normal. And then go down to your scale and change that to 100 and 100. And go back to your rotation and change that to 0. And now I can just do a regular old squash like this. Okay, now notice how simply I'm going about doing this. I'm not trying to animate all the pieces all the time. I'm just doing the vase. That's it. Just deal with the vase and everything else will kind of follow. Okay, so right here, I'm gonna have this guy kind of squeeze up. And then over here, I'm gonna have him squeeze down again. We'll deal with all the other stuff later, don't worry. And then right here, I'm gonna have it squeeze up again. And then down here, it's just the growth, right? So basically, like once we get to frame 7, that's the final scale. So I can change that to 100 and 100 and sleep better at night, right? Like those are done. Okay, so I've got my vase doing its thing. Now I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna get all the pieces to pop on at their recommended times based on my rough. So right here is where that very first cactus piece should show up. So I'm gonna just scooch that so it's present at that point in time. And hitting letter U here, I can take these keyframes and just shove them over. I'm also going to add a little bit of rotation, and the reason why is because that's going to look better. So with the rotation, I'm going to start it like rotated slightly to the left, and then when it comes over here, I'm going to rotate it slightly to the right, so it kind of keeps that same curvature that I have from my rough. And then I'm going to advance like this, and I'm going to move it like this again. Now it might make sense for me to also add some position animation. Because when things are like squashing and stretching, nobody's going to be like, oh, you shifted that. No, they're going to be like, wow, that's a really fun animation. So don't worry about accuracy when it comes to squash and stretch. Like, just think about how it feels when it's all together. So at that point in time that we have here, we have our cactus 3 growing on, and we've got cactus, ooh, not that guy. Sorry, we've got this guy happening, okay? So just moving those earlier so that they're like in place when they need to be. And this one, okay. And once again, I can like rotate and scale how I can rotate and adjust scale how I see fit. So this guy, I'm gonna add a little rotation to him. So at this point in time, I'm just gonna move these keyframes over so they're nice and neat. And I'm gonna have it rotated like that. And this guy, hold Shift and R, and I'm gonna rotate that guy also, like that. See that? And both of those guys are gonna start rotated a bit to the left. So I'm just dragging that second value on my rotation to the left a little bit, right? So they're, and then correct, so they're in the negative area. Okay, so then we've got this happening, and then this guy comes on, which is over here. So yeah, I just keep like moving my little pieces around so that they hit on the appropriate quote-unquote keyframes that I established in my rough animation. So these guys can have their like due, right? So here's letter U, so I can see those keyframes, and I'm just gonna move those like that and do a little rotation on that. So let's lock my rough. Just take this and rotate it back, and take this and rotate it back in order to get like that correct shape, you know? And these two, did I remember to set their rotation? No, I didn't. So once again, tilde to see them. I'm gonna turn on their rotation right there. And over here, probably gonna want to change where they started from a little bit. We'll see. So this was the one that comes out to the right. So I could probably move it further to the left. And then this guy, if I hit X, it scrolls him up. I'm gonna rotate him to the left as well. So just moving my mouse to the left, it rotates it to the left. Fancy that. So then it goes up here, and then I'm gonna go to this keyframe here, and I gotta move everybody now, right? So this guy, hit letter X, copy and paste his first position, because again, we do want to stay somewhat faithful to our original. And rotating that, selecting this guy, hit letter X, rotating that. Select this guy, rotating that, selecting this guy, you know, rotating that outward, because it's a squash at the end of it, right? Like it is squashing, so we want it to have like a, like almost like a dog ears down feeling to it, right? And then I'm gonna go forward. We've got just another couple keyframes here. And most of the work was done by the vase or the flower pot, which is kind of nice. And right here, I probably should have fixed that a little bit. Okay, so yeah, just trying to keep those keyframes aligned because, you know, fun fact, after I animate everything together, guess what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna move everything apart. So this guy here rotates to the left. Oh, they all rotate to the left. Locking the background once more, rotating this, grabbing this, rotating that. You know, you kind of get the idea. And I'm going to try to wrap this up pretty soon because we have gone a little bit over time. But I hope you kind of get the idea. So at any rate, after I've kind of set all of my keyframes in place, then what I like to do is just add a little delay on each of the pieces. Okay, so I don't do it right away, but I do like, so right here, okay. I don't like immediately like, oh yay, my keyframes are set, let me just, you know, real quick change, like offset everything. No, it doesn't really work that way. But what I do is I do a little bit of work in the graph editor. And if you've never used the graph editor, it's quite amazing, really, really useful, and it will make your animation just so much better if you've mastered it. Okay, so I would take all these keyframes, every single last one of them, and I would change them to easy ease. So F9 for easy ease, and easy ease. Then what I would do is I would take all of like these guys where it's like way up in the air like this, and this whole part needs to be like really slow, okay? Because like we might not even need this little keyframe right here. What happens if I delete it? Yeah, we needed it. So I kept it. But we want it to be like really slow on this part. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to just go in, select all those keyframes that are part of the slow action right here. I click on the graph editor and I make sure that I'm in the speed graph, okay, because we have a lot of different kinds of keyframes going on here. So I just lost my keyframe selection. I just drew another box right there. And I'm going to zoom in by clicking on the single noodle at the bottom. And I'm just going to pull on one of these keyframes to the right. And I know it's quite beautiful, isn't it? And I hold the shift key as I pull, and that's just going to make it slow down right there. Okay. And then if you have like an in-between area, like for example, this pose right here, like you don't want the thing to lose momentum as it gets into this pose, right? Like that would be nuts. Like that would not make sense for it to lose momentum right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the keyframe type. Okay, so for that interim keyframe right here, I'm going to select all of those guys and I'm going to change their keyframe type. And the way you do it, let me just zoom in on my timeline a bit. The way you do it is you just change this to what's called an auto bezier. So you can hold the Command or Control key down and just click it a couple times. That's one way to do it. Alternatively, you can do it in the graph editor, and there's like a thing. Yeah, convert selected keyframes to auto bezier. It's down at the bottom, and that just changes them to not lose speed through that movement. Okay, and it should look pretty good. Let's take a look right here. Oh my gosh, that is crazy bouncy. Let's see. Okay, and then I would just delay all the limbs. So like, just like how I did with the first example, I would just take each of these and just make them a couple frames later. So command clicking or control clicking to get all these guys in between here, and then just delaying everything by a couple of frames. So this is like frame 8, command click to deselect, and I'm just command clicking on the layer content bars to deselect those, and then right there, and I want 5 to be like the very last, so that can be significantly delayed, like maybe 4 frames compared to everybody else. And yeah, and it's a little funky because I need to fix the rotation a little bit on those, but that's the basic idea, is that you need to just sort of delay their response so that they can kind of go back to normal. Okay, so this is going to go back to 0 right here. Okay, and finally the blink. And yes, I will share my finished version of this in the Google Drive, so stay tuned for that. So for the blink, rather than having a fade on this, I'm going to have her eyes just open. And the way that the eyes are going to open is by starting on closed. And here's my method. I'm just going to change all these guys to opacity of 0 and turn on everybody stopwatch, animation toggle hold. Okay, and down at the very bottom, I'm going to change the eyes closed so those are on first. Okay, and then a couple of frames later, like frame 2, I'm going to select both these guys, and well, when our eyes open, it's a little slower, so this is going to go open, always going 2 frames forward. And one thing you can do too is if once you have like the 100%, 0% keyframes, you can just copy those. So these guys both need to go closed, go away. And if I just turn on transparent grid, you'll be able to see that better. What's this button here, right? So closed, little open, little more open. And I'm just doing this every like 2 frames. And then I'm going to repeat doing this when I go through and have the eyes, like the eye blink, okay? Except the blink is slightly different. The blink involves the eye going closed, like the eye goes half closed, and then it goes fully closed, and then it repeats this whole process. So here's our eyes opening up, right? And then for the blink, here's our eye open right here, and I would just drop that to 0. I would do 100% on the eye half, 2 frames on that, then eye closed, right? And leave that for 4 frames. Drop that back down to 0, and then I can just copy all this stuff later on. Now you might have noticed that you can't copy and paste keyframes from multiple layers, otherwise it duplicates your layers. So there's this this script. I know, I'm totally addicted to scripts. There's a script called Key Cloner, and it actually lets you copy keyframes across layers. And I'll put a link in the description to Key Cloner so you can download it on your own. Clone keyframes, and it just copies them all over the next. So here's what my blink looks like. Now I don't want it on the eyes that aren't winking, but I think you kind of get the idea. So eye left doesn't need it. Yeah, because eye left never did anything. Get it? Eye left. Sorry. All right, here we go. And here we go. Yeah, so that should do the trick. So it closes halfway, then all the way, then gradually opens up. So you don't need as many positions in the end. Okay, so take a look at my finished version. Let me know if you have any questions at all about how it was set up. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you in the comments. Let me know if you liked this tutorial, if you want to see more like this, or if there's something else that you would like to learn. I'd love to see it. All right, thanks everyone. I really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.